Hello and greetings from the brutal capitalist dictatorship of Kuala Lumpur. Actually, strictly speaking, we're not in Kuala Lumpur. We're in the Malaysian rainforest, which is about 30 to 40 minutes away from Kuala Lumpur. But let's just call it Kuala Lumpur for simplicity's sake. Okay. Welcome back to my YouTube channel, guys. I promised you a jungle tracking video, and here it is, in the heart of the Malayan rainforest. Because, although I may be a fancy Asian on the outside, in my heart, I'm a jungle Asian. Just like Chin Ping. Nah, I'm just kidding. Do I look like a man with an iota of discipline to be able to struggle in the jungle for some communist jihad? Look, I'm just a leftist degenerate, okay? I'm just a leftist degenerate who's trying to survive in this capitalist hellhole, okay? So don't racially profile me because I have a Chinese face, yeah? But yeah, this idea of this jungle Asian or fancy Asian is a very, very American-centric idea, because back in British times, Peranakans, Chinese with Malay ancestry, were considered the fancy Asians. Because, they were considered by the Brits to be the fancy Asians, because they were not as Chinese, they were not too Chinese for their taste, While the Chinese who came here, the late arrivals, they were regarded as the not posh Asians, those who came to escape hunger and famine from from China in the late 19th century. Those people were they were looked at by the colonizers the same way white racists in America look at black people today, right, in America. Unwashed, dirty, criminal, licentious. Anyway, I digress, okay? I'm going to go deeper into the forest, and then we can continue our little Thursday chat. I promised you a jungle tracking video, and here is our jungle tracking video. Okay, so a question you might be asking, what am I? Am I a late arrival descendant or Peranakan descendant? Well, I'm actually both. You see, on my mom's side, her dad's was a Hakka, and her mom's father was a cook from Guangzhou. So I'm a quarter Hakka, quarter Cantonese, but I'm actually half Peranakan as well. So yes, I know, I look like a full-blooded Chinese, whatever that means, which is what we're going to get into, actually. Today we're going to be talking about what we mean by race and culture. So you often hear people saying things like, I'm Asian, we have an Asian culture of excellence, or I'm African, we have an old ancient civilization, or I'm European, and we're the greatest race in the world. Not realizing, of course, that these are simply artificial delineations or artificial distinctions that arose very, very late in the history of humankind. Just like national borders themselves are simply artificial creations of the human mind, right? Now, it's funny that people should say that Confucius, the person whose name I use as my moniker, the Chinese philosopher, was actually a Chinese philosopher, because Confucius had no clue what a Chinese person even was, right? How could he? Confucius died in 479 BC. China, as a geopolitical entity, only came about in 221 BC, right? So Confucius would not have regarded himself as a Chinese person, or an Asian person for that matter, since the word Asia is itself the name of a Greek goddess. And it was used by the Greeks, people like Alexander the Great or Diogenes or Socrates, to describe people living in places like India, Persia, now known as Iran. But the Greeks were not thinking about people like myself, people who looked like myself, people who were East Asian, like Chinese, Japanese, or Koreans. Now, the word Europe comes from the Phoenician word Eruba, but I'm not sure what it means. You will have to check it up yourself. And the word Africa comes from the ancient Egyptian word. It's an ancient Egyptian word meaning the birthplace, right? Because the ancient Egyptians believed that, well, Egypt was the birthplace of human civilization. In fact, every single group believes that it is in fact, the birthplace there, or rather, they believe that their latest known ancestors were the ones who birthed human civilization. Like, I've even had people with the audacity to say to me that, oh, it doesn't matter that you've read the Analects twice, Even though you know every single line from Confucius's Analects, you never truly understand it unless you read it in Chinese, right? Because that you read it from English and you'll have some Eurocentric worldview. Like, bitch, you think Confucius spoke anything remotely similar to today's Mandarin? Huh? You think Confucius would understand a single word of Mandarin today? Let me show you what Confucius actually sounded like.
Sno work quang krang teng click rids deb dads con sragu sno walk crew rids longs gun magu cook nis sno walk sra smap work and tung click cook soon sno.
People change. Cultures change. They evolve over time. I mean, granted, there are some aspects of certain cultures, like if you want to say Asian culture, and I use that designation very, very loosely because I always find it to be a designation that's a slippery slope. Like, literally, this is a slippery slope, and this is an actual slippery slope. But it's a real slippery slope. I wonder if a snake is just going to come down and get me from up there. It's a real slippery slope when you say Asian, because you have people, saying like Ronnie Cheng, for example, saying that, oh, Indians are not real Asians. Asians are actually the Asians of the lighter complexion, like the Chinese, the Vietnamese, the Koreans, and the Japanese. But Indians, no, they're not Asian. So when you use these categories, or when you designate yourself based on these arbitrary categories like Asian or European or African, there's always a risk. You're always on a slippery slope of you see, I'm holding on to the vine for dear life. You're always on a slippery slope of dehumanizing certain groups, right? Of considering you to be part of an in-group and others to be part of an out-group as well, right? I think it was Swami Vivekananda who said that if you call yourself a European or a Muslim or Hindu, you are being violent, right? You're being violent because you have already separated yourself from the rest of humanity. So when you say, for example, I am part of the Asian community, then there must be by default an outgroup. Sorry, I'm just leeches. Leeches are dropping on me. There must be by default an outgroup as well. Or these blood-sucking leeches. They're almost as bad as the capitalists, but at least they're more honest about wanting to suck your blood. But when you designate categories arbitrarily like that, you end up creating an in-group versus an out-group, right? And what is fascism but in-group versus out-group? Now, I'm not saying that if you have an in-group, out-group mentality that you're necessarily a fascist, but fascism often uses distinctions, in-group, out-group distinctions, like the Asian Americans, right? are now there. When the whites wanted to, or rather not whites, sorry, when the reactionaries, I beg your pardon, when the reactionaries wanted to throw a wrench into the African American civil rights movement, what they did was they propped up the Asians as the model minority. So they told the Asians, you are part of the in group, right? You're not like those blacks. You're a good minority because you have culture, you have a civilization, you have stable, healthy family values. And again, you're treating people like a monolith because no two Asian people are the same. No two Chinese fellows are the same either, right? You can take me and take another fellow from Kuala Lumpur, from KL, and you'll find that we are as different, most likely, as night and day. I would not presume to speak on behalf of all Chinese people, but you have ethno-nationalists or people who really, really believe in this concept of fixed race, or shall we say, this fixed notions of race and culture. They have this tendency to try and speak on behalf of everyone in a society, right? And you'll notice it always happens to be the most backward, reactionary, social chauvinists who tend to be hardcore nationalists, right? It's always the most right-wing reactionary social chauvinists. Now, I've been called a hypocrite because on one hand I say that no group of people has a right to impose their culture or traditions on any other group of people. For example, people in America, such as the Native Americans, should have a right to follow whatever culture they want, right? And they shouldn't be forced to conform to European cultural norms, right? I think that that no group of people has the right to impose their own cultural norms. Again, I use that term very loosely because European cultural norms have evolved vastly ever since the fall of the Roman Empire, right? That there's hardly any similarity between the culture of Jordan Peterson, who was the ultimate Westoid, and the culture of the Western barbarians. And I don't mean this in an insulting way. The Western barbarians who sacked Rome, right? There's hardly any similarity between them. There's more similarity between myself and Confucius because, you know, that Confucian, Jordan Peterson, basically, or any other Westoid today, has undergone profound change in their culture as a result of both the, the Anglicization of their culture as well as the Christianization of their culture. Although I argue that the Christianity practiced by the European colonizers is really a bastardized type of Christianity, right? In order to serve as propaganda for the colonizers. But anyway, they say I'm a hypocrite because, yeah, I say that no group should have the right to impose their culture or values on any other group, right? And on the other hand, why is it that I'm arguing against the Iranian people's right to preserve their culture? And I ask you, who are the Iranian people, right? When you say the Chinese people or the Iranian people, when you speak on behalf of millions of people and you say, oh, the Chinese people or the Iranian people or the Malaysian people, who exactly are you speaking for except the people in that group who agree with you, right? First of all, Iranian culture today has nothing, virtually nothing to do, at least the culture that's practiced by the Ayatollah, has virtually nothing to do with Persian culture in the pre-Safavid era. So it makes it a moot point when you say that they want to preserve their culture by imposing such austere dress codes and such brutal punishments for not conforming to these dress codes and basically criminalizing homosexuality. These are not parts of the Persian culture before the Safavid invasion, right? So that's a moot point to say that this is Persian culture. That, you know, post Safavid invasion is not, at least the culture that's practiced by Ayatollah, the Ayatollah, has virtually nothing to do with the culture that was practiced by people like Xerxes or Darius, right? Second of all, who are the people, right? You treat the people of some arbitrary plot of land as if they are a monolith with a hive mind, with no individuality in thinking. When you say, like, the Chinese people, you know, like, for example, I've had people say to me, you don't respect the Chinese people because Chinese people are supposed to be socially conservative. The Chinese people want a socially conservative culture. Again, bitch, who are you to speak on behalf of the Chinese people? There are 1.4 billion people. Have you polled all of them? Have you asked all of them? Right? So when you say, who are you to speak on behalf of the Iranian people, I could also say the very same thing. Who the hell are you? You to speak on behalf of all the Iranian people. You talk as if all of them, the millions and millions of them, want the same things as you do. But the fact of the matter is that Iran, every single country, is a diverse population. There are going to be people who want this. There are going to be people who want that, right? Believe it or not, there are people in Asia who want us to be more Europeanized, right? Europeanized. And there are some of us who are trying to, like myself, who are trying to distance ourselves, cut the apron strings, and basically minimize European influence, right? Although I'm not saying that we need to cut, we need to take away every aspect of European influence. Like, we can certainly keep English, which is the lingua franca of business, science, and politics, right? We can certainly keep the good parts of European culture, but there are some of us who want a less Eurocentric worldview. And there are some people who want a more Eurocentric worldview. Who is a more legitimate voice, us or them, right? So, and again, Native Americans preserving their culture, like their style of dress, their mohawks and their clothing, is not the same as imposing some arbitrary dress code of putting women into beekeeper suits and putting, you know, and criminalizing homosexuals. That's very, very different from Native American culture. And yes, I don't think you need to be a Sam Harris or Bill Maher to say that, yes, not all cultures are equal. Yes, okay? Not all cultures are equal. And that doesn't make me a Western chauvinist. Even among Asian or African cultures, there are cultures which are more enlightened and less enlightened, you know? And this is usually, if you ask me, it is seen in their treatment of women and homosexuals and other vulnerable minorities in society. So, look, not every culture is equal, first of all, and you run the risk of stepping on a very slippery slope when you say that all cultures are equal. Because if you say all cultures are equal, that means cultures which marry off 13 or 14-year-old girls are necessarily equal to the more civilized cultures of the world, right? Do you see what I'm getting at? So I certainly don't believe that every single culture is equal. I don't think Western culture is superior to Asian culture, or Asian culture is superior to Western culture. But on the other hand, within each group, I don't think that all ideologies are equal, first of all. Second of all these things that you call culture or nation or whatever, these things are simply arbitrary definitions, right? Like, as I've said, if Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of China, had lived longer than 49 years of age for swallowing too many mercury pills, the Vietnamese down south and the Koreans and Japanese up north would be calling themselves 中国人 today. They would be calling themselves Chinese people today, okay? This idea of this nation state is an artificial designation by people, okay? And what about a guy who's like half African or half Chinese? Is he black? Is he Asian? Is he a model minority or a gangster thug? What is he? Right? So don't give me that bullshit about, how, the people of Iran have a right to preserve their traditional culture, because that is not even. First of all, you can't speak on behalf of all the people of Iran. There are going to be people who are unhappy with the current culture, which, frankly speaking, I wouldn't be either, okay? It's easy for us to criticize people when we have relative freedom, right? We don't run the risk of being punished for being labeled degenerate, again, by the most backward reactionary elements of a society. And second of all, who are the Iranian people? Is it the people who support the Ayatollah regime, or the people who are rebelling against it and are trying to revive the ancient Iranian culture, the ancient Persian culture? Who? No, obviously you don't consider the people who are trying to rebel against the post-Safavid regime as being true Iranians, because they don't fit your worldview of what a proper Iranian is. Because your idea of a proper Iranian is an Arabized, Islamized Iranian, right? Okay, I need to catch my breath for a while. Look, I'm not saying that we need to force people to stop wearing whatever clothing they want to wear. If they want to wear Islamic clothing, no one should be forced to, right? That's not my argument here. So it's rather disingenuous to say that I want them to stop this culture and adopt Western norms. But as I've said, if the Native Americans were to, for example, say that, everyone on American soil has to follow Native American customs, or that might be a problem, but that's not happening. So there's a difference between like the Native Americans trying to keep their ancestral cultures alive, which is perfectly respectable, and forcing some arbitrary culture that was imposed or that colonized this region of the world, because the current culture of Iran is the result of Arabic colonization. There's no getting around this fact, right? So, in fact, you are actually imposing colonizer culture on the people if you say that, the Iranians have to cover their heads, they cannot, we have to criminalize homosexuality. This is Arab Muslim culture, which is just as colonized, just as colonist as Christian European culture. But you only see the problem with one due to your extreme hatred of the West, that you think anyone who is opposed to the West or an enemy of the West is by default good, when in fact an imperialist can come from either east or west or north or south. Okay? Okay, let's put it this way. Not everyone who is an enemy of the West is by default good. Right? You see, the Barisan National Government of Malaysia, which is the corrupt, elite, capitalist ruling party, which constantly race baits us, they are vehemently anti-Israel. Of course, they have to be, because the majority of their voters here are anti-Israel, right? But they're not doing it out of the goodness of their hearts, out of any love for the Palestinian people. They're doing it because they want votes, right? If it was in their interest, they would be pro-Israel, okay? Look, just because Iran is geopolitically at a conflict of interest with the West or the Iranian regime. I'm not saying Iran because there's many positive things to say about the Iranian people. Just because the brutally right-wing and suppressive Iranian regime, we shouldn't even be ashamed of saying this, is opposed or is at a conflict of interest with the West. It doesn't mean that they're good. They're just as bad as European colonizers, who forced their European culture on other people. You want to condemn one, you have to condemn the other. I'm sorry. Uh, you know, it's anyway, I'm gonna end the video here. I'm going off for lunch now. And yeah, guys, this idea, the reason I don't speak on behalf of Asian people anymore is because I've grown up. I realize that my point of view is only a pebble on the beach in all of Asia. Asia is such a diverse continent, and even among Malaysian Chinese, there's such a diversity of opinions, right? Now, granted, I did say that race and culture were all artificial constructs, but does that mean that I wouldn't end up with a Malaysian Chinese girl, Malaysian Chinese lady? Probably I would, because you cannot control physical attraction. We are naturally attracted to what we're accustomed to, right? So a guy who grew up in America and was surrounded by blonde girls might be attracted to blonde women like Marilyn Monroe. I like black hair and black eyes, and I like the Chinese look. The stereotypical Chinese or Vietnamese or Korean look. So, first of all, although I say that race is an artificial construct, I mean, there are certain biological things that have been programmed as a result of social conditioning that we can't change. I can't change physical attraction to other Asian people, but at the same time, if, for example, my children ended up with an African or ended up with a Westerner, I would like to give that person a chance. I mean, I don't think that my children are actually killing the Chinese culture or killing the Confucian culture, because the Confucian culture, first of all, Confucius was not a Chinese person, I've mentioned, right? And second of all, the Confucian culture is not for the Chinese people. It is not for the people within Qin Shi Huang's empire. Confucianism is supposed to be shared with the world. You could be African, you could be European, you could be whatever, Middle Eastern, and be a Confucian. Okay, you don't have to be Chinese to be a Confucian, just like you don't have to be Arabic to be a Muslim, or you don't have to be Jewish to be a Christian, right? So I don't believe in mate guarding. Oh, sorry, not mate guarding. I don't believe in gatekeeping culture or traditions from people, because first of all, I say that race is only an arbitrary designation in order to divide all of us. Like yeah, for example, when that girl was wearing the cheongsam to her prom, the American girl, and this Asian American guy, I believe his surname was Wong, which would make him a Cantonese fellow whose ancestors were from Guangzhou, which is the deep south, was saying like, "Oh, my culture is not your prom dress," not realizing that girl was wearing something that was closer to the Manchurian culture than anything to do with the Cantonese culture, right? Cantonese culture would be a mix between Han and Baiyue, southern tribal people, right? So I find that people who have this notion that my culture, or people have this notion that culture is only supposed to be practiced by the people within that some particular race. Like, I think there was an American fashion magazine that was saying like, they said that, you can only wear a kilt if you're Scottish. Bullshit! Wear a kilt no matter what race you are. Wear a sarong, even though that's part of my Peranakan culture. Wear a sarong for all I care. You'll look good in it, I'm sure. It's much more comfortable than trousers, that's for sure. Because when you designate when you create artificial designations like that, artificial distinctions, we cannot unite as one race with a shared humanity if you constantly divide people like that, okay? Right? So, no. Practice whatever culture you like. If you want to, just don't impose it on other people. That's all. And like I say, religion, again, when you say that I attack the culture of Iran, what I'm doing is actually attacking the seeping in of religion, theology into people's lives. I think theology should stay out of people's biology. That's for sure. And look, although many people in this country, in Malaysia, agree that homosexuality should be criminalized, and basically that does that mean that our view, people like me who are in the minority, think that it should be accepted? Are we not the people as well? Why do you only take the most backward reactionary elements of a society and treat that as culture, right? Because let me tell you, the people are not simply the people whose views align with yours. The people are a diverse group, okay? So you have no right to speak on behalf of all the people in the country. Thank you, and have a nice day. And remember, we are all one race, the human race. Okay? Bangunlah rakyat yang tertindas, bangun rakyat yang diperas. Nyalakan api perjuangan, menjulang kebenaran. Hancurkan segala penindasan, ayo kita bangun, bangun. Dunia baru kita dirikan pasti jadi kenyataan. Perjuangan penghabisan bersatu kita lawan. Dan internasional pastikan berjaya.